Oceania is at war with East Asia. Oceania has always been at war with East Asia. Well, in the novel, of course, Oceania has not always been at war with East Asia. In fact, Oceania and East Asia were allies against Eurasia. But it suits the purposes of the inner party to make everybody think that the latest situation has always been the case. How is that any different from George W. Bush constantly mentioning the horrific fact that Saddam Hussein gassed his own people in 1988 at Halabja? How is it any different when at the time the U.S. actually had foreknowledge that he had chemical weapons, knew that he had gassed his own people, and did not protest back then? Saddam Hussein was a darling of the Reagan and Bush administrations.
The thing that is most amazing to me is the lying that goes on today. You are now teaching, I'm not making this up, we are teaching damage control and spin. I remember in this country we used to call spin lying. Now we call it spin, and we study it and we admire it. How to put out a line of bull and have it fly for more than 24 hours, and then they high-five each other because they beat the other side if it's another party or it's another candidate, or it's another company if it's one company with another with their annual report of their quarterly earnings or this or that. Public relations has overcome our whole society. It's all PR.
Sat at his computer, turned it on and tied to the world's mind. Hidden, brought a sense of baby with his enhanced memory, online and in line. Hidden, thoughts I take advantage of the symbiosis. It's been well designed. Crazy Jane is dancing. Crazy Jane's the dancer. Crazy Jane's the dance. See her. Weather sorrow, all corrupt tomorrow, in her own defense. Tommy had been taught to value anything that better kept the world flying.
Commissioner Copps.
Good morning. I strongly dissent to this decision because today the Federal Communications Commission empowers America's new media elite with unacceptable levels of influence over the ideas and information upon which our society and our democracy depend. At issue is whether a few corporations will be ceded enhanced gatekeeper control over the civil dialogue of our country, more content control over our music, entertainment, and information, and veto power over what the majority of our families watch, read, and hear. Radio deregulation gives us powerful and relevant lessons. When Congress and the Commission remove radio concentration protections, we experience massive and largely unforeseen consequences. Diversity of programs suffered. Homogenized music and standardized programming crowded out local and regional talent. Creative local artists found it ever more difficult to obtain playtime. Editorial opinion polarized. Competition in many towns became non-existent as a few companies brought up virtually every station in the market. This experience ought to terrify us as we consider visiting upon television and newspapers what we have inflicted upon radio.
Concerns about the degradation of broadcast content do not justify government manipulation of consumer choice. Degradation is just an elitist way of saying programming that one does not like.
The decision allows the giant media companies to buy up the remaining local newspaper and exert massive influence over a community by wielding 3 TV stations, 8 radio stations, the cable operator, plus the already monopolistic newspaper. The decision further allows the already massive television networks to buy up even more local TV stations so that they could control up to an unbelievable 80 or 90% of the national television audience. Where are the blessings of localism, diversity, and competition? I see centralization, not localism. I see uniformity, not diversity. I see monopoly and oligopoly, not competition.
It would be anathema to the First Amendment to regulate media ownership in an effort to steer consumers towards other programming.
90% of the top cable channels are owned by the same giants that own the TV networks and the cable systems. More channels are great, but when they're all owned by the same people, cable doesn't advance localism, editorial diversity, and competition. And those who believe the Internet alone will save us from this fate should realize that the dominating Internet news sources are controlled by the same media giants who control radio, TV, newspapers, and cable.
I refuse to pour 1 ounce of cement to support a structure that dictates to the American people what they should watch, listen to, or think.
The public reaction against the proposed changes has been unlike anything the FCC has ever seen. Of the nearly 750,000 comments we have received, nearly all oppose increased media consolidation, over 99.9%.
Those commissioners voting in favor of the item signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify. The item is adopted. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.
The list of well-recognized people and organizations who oppose all or part of the FCC's media ownership rules is one of the strangest lists of strange bedfellows you'll ever hear. Opponents include Walter Cronkite, William Safire, the National Rifle Association, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the National Organization for Women, Senator Jesse Helms.
Theoretically, deregulation is good, but it's not always the right way to go.
In the shadow of the largest corporate scandals in the history of this country, the last thing we need is to have regulators with no teeth. I believe it appears to me so evident that the big interests were served here at the expense of the public interest. Would you not agree with me that today those who most aggressively celebrate your decision are the biggest economic interest in broadcasting in this country? Are they not the ones that are celebrating your decision?
I have no idea who's celebrating our decision.
You really don't? Are you kidding me? You say they're modest changes. Clearly they're not modest changes when in nearly 200 cities, newspapers will be able to buy the television station. You say that it'll promote more competition. Nonsense. The evidence suggests that is simply not the case. You say that there will be few mergers and acquisitions. Of course, that stands logic on its head. And you say the court made us do it. The court didn't make you do it. I mean, this is the old joke in the movie, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? Commissioner Abernathy, you said that we were acting out of irrational fear instead of hard facts with respect to the issue of consolidation. Is there any evidence that you see with respect to consolidation, particularly with respect to radio in recent years, and also television, that would suggest we have an irrational fear of consolidation?
What you have to balance here is you have to balance the First Amendment rights of the licensees against the rights of all the public to have diversity, localism, and competition.
The founders did not anticipate the protections for commercial speech that we now have, and nor did they anticipate essentially the warp to the sense of the First Amendment that has occurred really since the 1970s.
We have to revisit the terms. What did they mean? What were they talking about? They can't possibly have meant that there should be free speech rights for transnational corporations, because there weren't any back in the 18th century. They didn't exist. They weren't thinking of that. They were thinking of the citizens of the democracy.
Citizens have First Amendment rights to a diversity of antagonistic views.